Welcome to Life Stories, where we share real, inspiring tales of love, loss, and personal growth. Today's story is one of betrayal, strength, and the power of reclaiming your life. When Emily discovered that her marriage was built on lies, she didn't let it break her. Instead, she turned her pain into a calculated plan that would lead her to a future she never thought possible. Join us as we explore how Emily faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged stronger than ever. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's story. It was the morning of Mark's birthday, and I was still in bed. The sunlight peeking through the curtains, casting soft golden rays across the room. The atmosphere felt like a gentle whisper of a new day. It should have been a celebration, a special moment in the life we had built together. Yet, as I reached for my phone to check the time, something felt wrong. The weight of the moment was heavier than usual. I had spent months saving up for the perfect gift. All of my spare cash tucked away in an envelope. Cutting back on lunches and little indulgences just to afford the luxury watch I knew he'd been eyeing. It was expensive, yes, but the thought behind it was even more precious. A gesture of love, a symbol of the time we'd spent together, of the years ahead that I'd hoped we would share. A birthday watch, one that was meant to mark a milestone in our marriage. Mark had always been the attentive one when we first met. He had been engaged, truly interested in what I had to say, listening with such care that I felt seen in ways I hadn't known were possible. It was rare for me to meet someone who didn't either feel threatened by my career or try to take over the conversation, mansplaining my field to me. He was different, a marketing executive with a sharp mind and an easy charm. He was my opposite in so many ways, but in the ways that mattered. We had clicked. That morning, as I stood beside our bed, holding the beautiful gift box in my hands, I felt the warmth of our early years together, the laughter, the long conversations late into the night, the plans we made. I hadn't seen those moments in months, but they had been real, hadn't they? When I reached for the alarm on his nightstand, it was almost instinctual. I wanted him to rest, to sleep in, to feel loved on his birthday. But then he snatched the phone from my hand. Mark's sudden movement was sharp, almost angry, as he yanked his phone away from me, his fingers gripping it possessively. "Don't touch my phone," he snapped, his voice harsh, like I had crossed an unspoken boundary. I froze, stunned by the defensiveness in his voice. This wasn't like him. I had never touched his phone before, not out of lack of trust, but simply because I never felt the need. But something about the way he reacted left me speechless. I stood there, my hand still holding the gift box with the watch. A beautiful, expensive timepiece, one that had cost me almost everything I had saved up. Yet, Mark didn't even look at it. He took the box without a word, muttering a half-hearted, "thanks," and placed it aside, completely indifferent, his eyes never leaving the screen of his phone. I stood there, watching him, my heart sinking. My love for him suddenly feeling so distant, as if it had turned into something cold and foreign. I tried to tell myself it wasn't a big deal, that he was probably just stressed about work or some other external pressure. It had been months of tension, of him being distant, of working long hours, coming home late, barely acknowledging me when I asked about his day. I had convinced myself it was just the pressure of a promotion he was hoping to secure. I had brushed it all off. But this moment, was different. His reaction was different. His avoidance of me, his silence, the way he shut me out even on his own birthday. It struck me in a way that left me raw and vulnerable. But what hurt more than anything wasn't the phone or the watch, it was the indifference. The utter lack of care. It was like a wall had been built between us, and I was no longer on the other side of it, reaching out to him. I was standing on the outside, looking in, unable to get through. This wasn't the man I had married. The man who once brought me coffee in bed. Who listened to me talk about the intricacies of my job with genuine interest. Was he really gone? Or had I simply projected my hopes and dreams onto someone who had never truly seen me? As the days passed, I noticed more. I watched him grow more withdrawn, more defensive. He would come home late, always absorbed in his phone. He'd snap at me for the smallest things. The spark was gone. The warmth, the connection, it was as if I was sharing space with a stranger. I told myself it was just the stress of his upcoming performance review. The one that could finally secure the promotion he had been working toward. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. It wasn't just work. Something had changed, and it was not just on his side. One evening, as Mark took a shower, my phone buzzed with a message from Kate, my best friend. I had known Kate for years, and we shared everything. But this message, it took my breath away. I need to show you something. Don't freak out. The text read. My heart skipped a beat. I clicked on the attachment. And then my world tilted. There it was. A screenshot of Mark's dating profile. A picture of him from our recent weekend getaway to San Antonio. Taken just 3 weeks ago. Was front and center. The caption read, "Successful professional seeking meaningful connection. Newly single and ready to explore what life has to offer." My hands shook as I stared at the screen. Newly single. We had just celebrated our anniversary last month. I was stunned. My mind raced. My heart pounding in my chest as I tried to process what I was seeing. Was this really happening? Could Mark be so blatantly dishonest? Could he be so far gone from me, from our marriage, that he would seek validation from other women while I was right beside him? I had a choice in that moment. I could confront him right then and there. Demand answers. Throw the phone in his face and make him explain himself. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I deleted the message, placed my phone face down on the bed, and waited for Mark to finish his shower. As he stepped out, I put on a smile and greeted him like everything was fine. But inside, something had already changed. I wasn't sure how much longer I could pretend. But I wasn't going to confront him just yet. I needed to understand what I was dealing with first. To gather the evidence I needed before I did anything. Because I had learned one thing in my life. I was not going to be the one left broken by this. Mark was going to regret underestimating me. He was going to see exactly what he was throwing away. I could hardly believe what I had just discovered. But the proof was right in front of me. Mark's profile on a dating app. Complete with a photo from our recent trip. Labeled him as newly single, a lie that cut deeper than any betrayal. But instead of confronting him right away, I decided to step back and gather my thoughts. Confronting him in the heat of the moment wouldn't give me the clarity I needed. I wasn't just going to catch him in the act. No, I had to be smarter than that. I had to understand the full extent of his betrayal before making any decisions. What hurt the most wasn't the infidelity. It was the fact that Mark was already planning a future without me. I wasn't just a partner to him anymore. I was a placeholder. Someone to tolerate until he was ready to move on. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. But I knew I had to channel that anger into something far more strategic. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about showing Mark the consequences of underestimating me. The next few days passed in a blur. On the surface, everything remained normal. I smiled, cooked dinner, asked him about his day, anything to keep the peace. But under the surface, I was planning. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let him get away with this. It wasn't in my nature to let things slide. I had always been practical, logical, and methodical, traits that had served me well in my career as an IT security specialist. And now, I would use those same traits to uncover the truth and make sure Mark understood the full weight of his actions. I began by observing his behavior more closely. The watch I had bought him remained untouched on the dresser. He barely even glanced at it, as if it meant nothing to him. When I casually asked him if he liked it, he mumbled something about saving it for a special occasion and didn't even seem to remember the brand. I felt my heart sink a little more. That watch represented months of saving. And he couldn't even acknowledge the thought and effort I had put into buying it for him. While he was at work one day, I made the decision to check his laptop. Normally, I would never have invaded his privacy. But desperate times called for desperate measures. I knew he'd erased his browser history. But I also knew about the shared cloud backup system we had in place, an amateur mistake on his part. It only took me a few moments to find the traces of his secret life. He had multiple dating profiles, secret email accounts, and, worst of all, evidence of at least 3 active conversations with different women. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking, as I read through the messages. In one painful exchange, he described me as boring and too focused on my career. He even mentioned that the only thing holding him back from leaving was financial reasons. He had been using me, keeping me around for the stability I provided while he waited for his promotion. Once that was secured, he would finally have the cushion he needed to start his new life, without me. I couldn't stop reading, even though every word made me feel more betrayed than the last. It was like I wasn't even a person to him. I was just a stepping stone. A financial necessity until he was ready to move on. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I wasn't going to let him think he could discard me like that. I would make him see what he was about to lose. And I would do it in a way that left him no room for excuses. I knew I had to gather more evidence. More proof. And then I would make him regret everything. I wasn't just going to be the wronged wife. I was going to make sure Mark understood that I had always been one step ahead of him. As the days passed, I played the part of the loving wife, never letting on what I had discovered. But in the back of my mind, I was preparing, I was planning my next move, and when the time was right, I would make sure Mark saw just how wrong he had been about me. I would make him pay, not with anger, but with the full weight of the truth. And he would regret it. I would make sure of it. I knew I had to wait for the right moment. In a situation like this, patience was key. I couldn't just rush in and throw everything I had discovered in Mark's face. I had to give him enough rope to hang himself, but also ensure I had everything in place when the time came. I was meticulous. I needed him to see the full scope of his betrayal, to experience the depth of the lies he'd woven. Only then would I confront him. And only then would he understand just how much he had underestimated me. Mark had no idea that his every move was being watched. He still thought everything was fine between us. That he was getting away with his secret life. He continued to work late. His phone constantly buzzing with notifications that he'd carefully hide whenever I was nearby. I played along, asking about his day, offering support when he complained about his work stress. Just as I always had. But beneath my calm exterior, I was building my plan. Piece by piece. And soon, I would strike. I couldn't help but notice the way he had been acting recently, distant. Preoccupied. He was still charming with the people around him. But with me, there was a palpable distance. The affection, the attention, it was all gone. It was as if I was invisible to him. And yet, whenever we shared a quiet moment, like sitting down for dinner, he still expected me to be there. Still relied on me to be the steady one. But he had already checked out. His heart wasn't here anymore. And I had to accept that. I kept my observations sharp. His phone was his lifeline. And I made sure to keep an eye on his behavior. I knew I couldn't just walk up to him and ask for an explanation. He would lie. He would deny it. Probably even turn the situation around on me. No. I needed to give him a reason to believe he had everything under control. So I could catch him in the act. The day Mark's promotion was set to be announced, I decided the time had come. He had been waiting for this moment for months. The promotion that would supposedly secure his future. The financial stability he needed to walk away from me. Little did he know, I was about to turn the tables. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks. Collecting evidence and carefully orchestrating the final step of my plan. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, I casually mentioned how proud I was of him. "You've worked so hard for this promotion," I said, my voice steady, calm, almost sweet. He looked up from his phone, surprised by my support. "Thanks," he replied, his face softening for just a moment before returning to his screen. It was all so predictable. The way he could only show any emotion when it benefited him. I smiled, hiding the bitterness that bubbled up inside me. "You've earned it, Mark," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was heavy. "I'm sure things will get better for you soon." I knew this was my moment. As Mark excused himself after dinner, claiming he needed to work late on a big presentation for his promotion, I excused myself as well. But instead of retreating to my own work, I locked myself in our home office, preparing the final stages of my plan. I had everything ready. The fake identity I had crafted, Samantha, was already in place. The conversation I had nurtured with Mark through Samantha was on the brink of reaching its climax. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. Not yet. There was still more to do. More steps to take. But a part of me, the part that had been neglected and hurt for so long, felt a flicker of satisfaction. Mark had no idea what was coming for him. He thought he could walk away. But first, he would have to face the consequences of his actions. He would understand, in the most profound way possible, that he couldn't just discard me without reckoning for the damage he had done. As I worked late into the night, carefully crafting my responses as Samantha, I allowed myself to imagine what the next few weeks would bring. The confrontation, the truth, and ultimately, my own freedom. I knew it would hurt. I knew it would feel like an ending. But it would also be a new beginning. One where I could rebuild my life without the weight of betrayal holding me down. The foundation for my future was already being laid. And I was ready for whatever came next. As the days passed after the confrontation, I couldn't shake the feeling of liberation that washed over me. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. I had spent so much time wondering what had gone wrong in my marriage. What I could have done differently to save it. But the truth was, I couldn't save something that had already died. Mark had made his choice long before I found out. And now, I was making mine. The divorce papers were signed. And Mark moved out of our shared apartment. It was hard, but it was also a relief. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. I felt a strange sense of calm. Like the weight of the past had been lifted off my shoulders. I didn't need to wonder anymore. I didn't need to live in uncertainty or chase someone who had already left me emotionally. It wasn't easy, but I started rebuilding my life. I found strength I never knew I had. Tina, my colleague, became a source of unexpected support. She recommended me for a cybersecurity project that doubled my income and reignited my passion for work. I moved into a small house in East Austin, one I had always dreamed of, and I planted my first vegetable garden. Every seed I planted was a reminder of the new life I was growing. 6 months after that night at the restaurant, the divorce was finalized. Mark tried to reach out, but his attempts were too little. Too late. I had moved on, and there was no going back. As I stood in my new home, surrounded by the fruits of my labor, I knew that the greatest lesson I had learned was to always be honest with myself. Life wasn't always kind, but it was honest, and now, I was living it on my own terms. Thank you for reading. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring life stories.